Hello YouTube, this is I Sleep Too Late here with another video, and today I'm going to be doing a deck tech of my EDH Teferi Temporal Archmage deck, which I just put together. If you saw one of my previous videos, I did a deck feature of a foiled out Talrand deck, and this deck actually is the evolution of that last deck. I took apart the Talrand deck and turned it into a more competitive EDH deck. And then I decided, you know what, there's a lot of expensive cards in my collection. I'm going to throw those in here as well. So this deck might not be optimized, might not be like 100% competitive, but it is very expensive, and I chose to go the money tribal route. So rather than calling this competitive Teferi, I'm going to call this Teferi money tribal. So hope you guys enjoy. Before I get started, I just want to show you that I actually triple sleeved this deck. So all of these cards have been fitted with the KMC Perfect Hard inner sleeves, the Grand Prix New Jersey Brainstorm sleeves, and these over sleeves that have this funky design on the borders. So before I just want to show you how thick this deck really is by showing you guys the side here. So this is a magic back card just to compare the size. As you can see, it's very, very thick. So I'm going to go ahead and go section by section. We're going to start with the mana base. So right off the bat, you'll see that I have 36 lands, which is a lot of lands actually for a competitive deck. Most competitive decks will run 30 to 31 lands. In my case, I chose to make this deck less competitive and opted to play more lands. Some of these lands actually don't tap for blue mana, and actually some of them don't even tap for mana or can even cast some of my spells, which you'll see later on. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and break down for you what lands I included and why. So as you can see, I'm running 20 basics. That's a good number actually. That means that I'll have about 1 in 5 chance of drawing a basic island. And I'm also running 4 fetch lands, which is pretty good because that means I really have a 24 islands essentially. Virtually meaning that I'll have about maybe 2 islands or access to 2 islands in my opening hand, because about like 1 in 4 chance of getting one, and let's say you draw like 7 cards, so it's about a little less than 2 islands per opening hand. And with the 2 other blue sources that I'm running, Minimo and Oboro, it's gonna be good. I'll definitely have enough blue sources to cast my spells. So you're probably wondering why I'm running these 2 lands, because probably a lot of EDH Teferi decks will not be running these lands, especially Oboro. Well, first of all, if you don't know what the combo is, I'll explain later that Chain Veil will infinitely combo with Teferi, if you're not familiar with that. And Chain Veil is a legendary artifact, so being able to untap Chain Veil with Minimo is actually pretty useful. In some cases, it might actually enable the combo without you actually having to invest a lot of mana or a lot of effort in untapping Chain Veil. Oboro is also another include because, well, I could have made this another island, but I really wanted to stick to the 20 islands that I had. It would be very hard for me to obtain a 21st island just for Oboro replacement. But this will filter colorless mana into into blue mana, so I can pay a colorless to return this to my hand. If I haven't had a land drop yet, I can just replay this land and essentially turn the colorless mana into blue mana. Now these 4 lands are typical includes in Teferi Chain Veil. As you can see, Ancient Tomb is pretty much essential because it just adds 2 colorless, which is good. You definitely need to ramp into Teferi. Academy Ruins is good because we're running a lot of artifacts and we want to be able to recover those artifacts to our hand. In this case, it'll return it to the library. There are other lands that do something sort of like this. I decided to cut those. A lot of Teferi decks will run cards like Academy Ruins, but I thought Academy Ruins alone is probably good enough. Inventor's Fair is another one that recently came out in Kaladesh. Well, not recently, but it allows you to gain life, and it also, more importantly, allows you to search your library for an artifact card. In this case, probably going to be Chain Veil. Put it into our hands, and then you can only activate it if you have 3 or more artifacts. So essentially, kind of like a metal craft ability. But it's pretty cool. I like the card. It's actually very essential to the deck. Now this one is Tabernacle, and if you don't know Italian, basically it's a legendary land that doesn't tap for mana. A lot of Teferi decks are running this land. It basically says each creature on the battlefield has, at the beginning of your upkeep, destroy this creature unless you pay 1 mana. So essentially, it taxes everyone's creatures 1 mana, so they either denies them mana or they have to destroy the creature. Now, moving on to these other lands. So those are the lands that you usually see in Teferi Chain Veil, but these lands don't really see that much play. Mishra's Workshop is good because it adds 3 colorless however, it only casts artifact spells. So that's a little bit of a downside. A lot of competitive players will tell you that this card is bad in the deck, is actively bad because it doesn't cast any of your instant sorceries or any of your blue non-artifact cards. It doesn't help with Teferi itself. However, it does help cast Chain Veil, which I find useful enough to include in the deck. Bazaar of Baghdad is actually a really terrible card, especially if you're not on Dredge. It allows you to draw 2 and then discard 3 when you tap it. Doesn't add any mana itself. I usually like to run cards like Urborg to make these type of lands, like Tabernacle and Bazaar, able to add mana. However, this one is good because at the very least it filters your hand. So if you have, your blue deck, you're gonna have a lot of cards in hand. If you have about 5 cards in hand or even 4, it'll be card at disadvantage to discard 3 after drawing 2 cards. However, you're gonna be able to filter your cards. So let's say Chain Veil is the second top card in your library. If you activate Bazaar, you're gonna find that you're gonna dig deeper. And even though you'll discard 3 cards, hopefully you discard cards that don't even matter. So that's actually the original point of Bazaar of Baghdad. That was what it was originally intended to do before Dredge came out, and that's what we're using it for. Now these other lands are kind of cards that you don't typically see in any Teferi deck, actually. Most competitive decks will not run Strip Mine or Wasteland. However, they are cards that you usually see in like casual, or maybe not even casual, but in like regular decks. I mean, they're good in Legacy, they're good in Vintage, because you're one-on-one playing against one opponent, and you're going to be able to destroy one of their lands. If you destroy someone's lands and you have 2 other opponents, it's bad. It's kind of card disadvantage. You're just kind of screwing someone else and yourself by ruining a land drop at the expense of you're gonna have 2 other opponents who are gonna have more mana than you. But they're pretty good. They can be useful if you want to destroy a Gaia's Cradle or destroy a problematic land. So that's why we play it in this deck. Now Mutavault is another include because, well, first of all, it's the champion promo Mutavault, the full art one, which I really liked. I did acquire one and I always wanted to play it. I actually could have played it in a bunch of other decks, but I really think that this is the money tribal deck, and that's the only reason why we really play Mutavault. City of Traders is another one. This one's not actually pimped out like any of the other lands. I believe there is a foil test print City of Traders. I don't know if it's actually legal, as it is a test print, but this card is actually getting really high. It's becoming a lot more and more expensive. I don't know exactly what the price is now, but there you have it, folks. That's the mana base of my Chain Veil Teferi deck. So now we're going to get into the artifact section of this deck tech. But before I do, I'm going to start with the first artifact, which we'll talk about, the namesake of the deck, Chain Veil. So first of all, I want to show you Teferi, because if you don't know what it already does, its +1 is basically Sleight of Hand, which looks at the top 2 cards, put one into your hand and the other on the bottom. Its -1 is what becomes relevant in this deck because it untaps 4 target permanents. And then the -10 ability can be relevant, though not exactly the part we're interested in, which is to activate Planeswalkers at instant speed, including on your opponent's turn. So the -1 ability is really what we're interested in here. It's going to combo out with Chain Veil Teferi, which basically says it's 4 mana, and it says at the beginning of your end step, if you didn't activate a loyalty ability this turn, you lose 2 life. And it's -4. It's a second ability is what we're interested in here. It's pay 4 and tap it for each Planeswalker you control. You can activate that ability basically an additional time. And what's interesting is that when a planeswalker leaves the battlefield and re-enters the battlefield, this ability continues to stay. So if you've cast Teferi and it's at 5 loyalty, you minus 1 it 5 times, and you activate Chain Veil 5 times, and it gets destroyed, or it dies to its loyalty, having no loyalty counter, and you recast it. It's going to be able to activate 5 times because of Chain Veil. So you don't have to reactivate Chain Veil to continuously reset the clock. It actually just can activate itself an additional 5 times as long as Chain Veil was activated 5 times this turn. So that's actually how we generate basically infinite mana, assuming that you have 3 other permanents that can add 5 mana, because you're gonna put in 4 mana every time you activate this, and with the extra 5th mana, you'll be able to generate additional mana, which will eventually turn into infinite mana after activating Chain Veil an infinite number of times. And then with the infinite Planeswalker activations, you can +1 Teferi, thereby drawing your entire deck. So that's essentially how we're going to win with this combo, and we're going to go ahead and move on to some of the other artifacts that will help us either get Chain Veil or support Chain Veil. So the next 3 artifacts I'm going to talk about are some of the ways that we can generate infinite mana. Grim Monolith and Basalt Monolith are artifacts that create 3 colorless mana when you tap it. If you can't read Basalt Monolith, it basically also says you can pay 3 to untap Basalt Monolith. And however, both Basalt and Grim Monolith don't untap on your untap step. So you're going to have to find a way to untap them either through Teferi himself or through these other methods. So as you can see here, Rings of Brighthearth says, whenever you activate an ability, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 2, and you can copy that ability, choose 2 targets for the copy. Power Artifact says activation costs are reduced by 2. We'll not be able to reduce it to 0, however. And what's interesting about this, it's an artifact, it's an enchantment aura that enchants an artifact. So as you can see, I am including cards that aren't artifacts in this section because I think it's important to show you some of the interactions. Rings of Brighthearth is good because it essentially can infinitely combo with Basalt Monoliths, right? So you can activate Basalt Monolith for 3 mana, then pay 2 to copy that, or to rather to copy the untap ability. So the untap is 3, so you're paying 2 additional, so that's 5. And then you get to untap Basalt Monolith, thereby activating it twice, sorry. So that's 6 colorless mana. You're tapping Basalt Monolith for 6, and you're spending 5 colorless to do it. So that's essentially giving you kind of infinite mana, sort of. And then Grim Monolith doesn't actually combo with Rings of Brighthearth, because what ends up happening is you pay 4 to untap it, you pay 2 to copy it, so you're paying 6, and Grim Monolith only gives you 6. So if you activate it, tap it for mana twice. So Rings of Brighthearth only combos with Basalt Monolith. However, Power Artifact will combo with both Basalt and Grim. Now I've also used Rings of Brighthearth to activate fetch lands twice, giving me 2 islands, which is pretty sweet tech, actually. I've done that a couple of times, and it's been pretty useful. So Rings of Brighthearth is a pretty useful card. It can also be used to copy in Planeswalker activations. It's a very useful card. So there you have it. These are some of the artifacts, and we're gonna move on to the other mana rocks as well. So I'm not going to go into the Power 4, which is Chrome Mox, Mox Diamond, Mana Crypt, and Sol Ring, only to say that Mox Diamond and Chrome Mox will be card disadvantage. However, ramping is very important, especially in a competitive setting. You're also going to be able to refill your hand with Time Twister and Windfall, which will become very important later on. Mox Opal is another good 0-drop artifact, which will help you with, just as long as you have 2 artifacts, it'll be fine. Lion's Eye Diamond is the one that is very sketchy. A lot of people will not be playing this card in their Teferi decks. However, it can be useful, again, with Time Twister and Windfall, because you can hold priority, crack it, and then you'll get 3 additional blue mana after you refilling your hand. The other thing you can do is, if you don't have any cards in hand and you have Chain Veil out and Teferi out, you can help with Chain Veil activations I mean, you're just going to need one more mana because Chain Veil, as you saw before, is 4 mana to activate. But that's going to be useful for that as well. So, you know, it does have its, very corner case uses, but it's useful enough for me to want to include it in this money tribal deck. Here's some additional mana rocks. As you can see, the top 3 add 3 mana, which is very useful because you're going to want to add enough mana to have 5, as long as I said before, if you have 5 mana available with these artifacts or with these 4 permanents that you untap with Teferi, you can generate infinite mana. So what we're looking for, not only with Chain Veil and Teferi, are these artifacts. Right, so Mana Vault obviously doesn't untap, just like the Basal Monolith and Grim Monolith. However, it does add 3 colorless. This Gilded Lotus just adds 3 mana of any color, which is insane for 5 mana. It'll be useful because it'll untap and be able to cast blue spells, right? So these other artifacts like Thran Dynamo and Mana Vaults only add colorless mana. So these 3, keep in mind, we're going to be untapping them with Teferi and generating our infinite mana loops. Now, Felwar Stone, if you can't read it, basically says add mana to your mana pool of any, I think it's like any mana source your opponents can produce or lands. I don't exactly know, but chances are you're going to face another blue player. If you do, that's going to, even if you don't, it's going to add mana for 2 mana. So it's going to be good ramp. Mind Stone is another one. I cut out Prismatic Lens from this deck only because, it does essentially the same thing as Mind Stone, but it doesn't have the draw card ability. Instead, it has filter colors into colored mana, which we can already just do. So I know it does hurt to not include Prismatic Lens, but it is something that I decided to do for this deck in place of more expensive cards. Here are the last 4 artifacts that I wanted to include. Voltaic Key is obviously essential. It'll just untap an artifact and it'll either ramp us or do whatever else it needs to do. Sensei's Divining Top is very useful. Candelabra, I wanted to just kind of explain to you, even though it is a mono artifact, that means that you have to tap it. So it doesn't just generate infinite mana with, this doesn't just say X and colon. It's X and tap to untap X target lands. So, as you saw before, we had like maybe 2 lands that could be used for this, Ancient Tomb and City of Traders. However, we do run High Tide, which I'll explain later. And after casting High Tide, Candelabra becomes a lot more useful. A lot of Teferi decks aren't running Candelabra, but it is a card that I own, and I wanted to just use it in a competitive or semi-competitive fashion. So that's where we are. Memory Jar is, again, it's kind of like a Time Twister. It's pretty useful. You can actually crack Lion's Eye Diamond after holding priority to this as well, which is also, something interesting to think about. And Sensei's Divine Top is pretty self-explanatory. Since we are a Planeswalker deck, I thought I'd just show you the other Planeswalkers that I'm running. None of these which are in English, but one is Tezzeret the Seeker, the other is Ugin, and the other one is Jace the Mind Sculptor. Ugin and Jace the Mind Sculptor are win conditions. Ugin can just bolt everyone to death after the Teferi combo, and Jace the Mind Sculptor can eventually just ultimate himself, and nobody will have a hand. Pretty strong, actually. Tezzeret I've actually won with because it was able to ramp or untap, I think it's 2 artifacts or something like that, yeah. This is in Spanish, so you probably can't read it, but needless to say, these artifacts, these Planeswalkers are pretty strong. We have 2 win cons in the form of Jace the Mind Sculptor and Ugin. However, most competitive decks, I just want to say, only you run like one of these 2. They barely run both of them. But because, I have the promo, Fate of Ugin, whatever promo, and the foil Japanese Jace the Mind Sculptor, I couldn't resist. I had to run both of them. While we're on the subject of Planeswalkers, I thought I'd just mention that I cut out Curse Totem for Jace Vryn's Prodigy, only because Jace Vryn is really useful. It's a good card. It is a Planeswalker, since we just got out of the Planeswalker section. It's very useful in filtering out your hand. Its activated abilities for Planeswalkers are also, decent. -3 is probably what you'll be using most of the time. Jace Vryn's Prodigy is probably not optimal. A lot of decks don't run Jace Vryn's Prodigy. However, I do have the San Diego Comic-Con, which is really cool. Here's the front and back. It's pretty pretty decent looking. I'm using, normally I would use the proxy, one of those checklist cards, but I did have another Jace Rinse Prodigy lying around, so I'd use that as the checklist card, so to speak, just in place of that. So, obviously this will be in the deck box, and I'll just, whenever I cast Jace, I'll just throw this out there. Here is, Gilded Drake is kind of part of the removal package. This says when it enters the battlefield, or as it enters the battlefield, I think, you just switch control of it and another creature. So you can gain control of opposing Girogs, you can gain control of, opposing threats that may be very difficult to deal with, as for whatever the creature might be. Snapcaster Mage is just another, it's kind of like Jace Vrins in that you can just -3 is about the same, does the same thing. But this Snapcaster Mage is pretty cool. It's a judge promo. I actually really like the ability because, as you'll see later on, Snapcaster Mage will enable some kills. It'll enable you to flashback Stroke of Genius for infinite mana, thereby killing an opponent. We'll get to that when we get to that card. But I also just wanted to mention that here are some of the other creatures that will tutor for certain things. Spellseeker will be able to tutor for a lot of things. They'll be able to tutor for Merchant Scroll if we want a Merchant Scroll. It'll be able to mainly tutor probably Transmute Artifact is probably what you'll get with this if you wanted to just find something. Trinket Mage is good because it'll enable us to find our Mana Crypt if we want. Probably our Mana Vault, only because it adds 3 mana. Again, we need part of the combo. It's not just a 2-card combo. It's Teferi, Chain Veil, and artifacts that'll be able to add multiple mana. So Trinket Mage will enable us to find those artifacts that are very important in the combo. So since we were just talking about Transmute Artifact, I thought I'd talk about the instant sorceries that either deal with artifacts or can search for artifacts or are just in general useful. So let's just start with Transmute Artifact. It just it's a long ago card that basically says sacrifice an artifact, and then, well, I think that might be a cost actually, but anyway, you'll destroy an artifact that you control, or send it to the graveyard, and then you find another artifact, probably Chain Veil, and then you just pay the difference. So even though it is 2 mana, you're going to pay the difference. So if you sacrifice a Mana Vault and you get Chain Veil, then you have to pay 3 mana. If you sacrifice Basalt Monolith, you only have to pay 1 mana. So it is a useful card. It's kind of very similar to Reshape, which is actually kind of the same thing, except Reshape will have to pay 2 additional mana because of the casting cost of Reshape. The X will actually be part of the artifact itself. So Reshape is a little bit weaker than Transmute Artifact, but still pretty useful nonetheless. Fabricate and Word of Invention will both find Chain Veil as well. We've got Thirst for Knowledge, which will discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact card after drawing 3 cards. So it is a useful card. It'll filter our hand. And Intuition is a card that will probably find, either an artifact or one of these cards. If we're just missing Chain Veil, then we can just find, 3 of those tutors for the artifact. Here's some other tutors that either find, in the case of Mystical Tutor, Instant Sorcery, in the case of Merchant Scroll, Blue Instant, and other cards such as Impulse and Dig Through Time, which don't exactly tutor, but pretty useful. They dig through our deck and find cards, essentially being sort of like a little pseudo-demonic tutor. Here's some additional card advantage spells. Very powerful. Pull from Tomorrow, probably one of the best draw spells in the game. We're not running Blue Sun Zenith, just because it's 3 blue mana is too much, especially if you're running all these colorless mana. Stroke of Genius is very powerful. It's instead of 1-2 blue, you need only 1 blue, which is very useful if you have the infinite mana with Basalt combos. Even if without Teferi, you can just win with infinite mana with Power Artifact or whatever, and then just kill them with Stroke of Genius. You essentially, if you have like 2 or 3 blue mana open and then you have the infinite outlet, you can just cast Stroke of Genius, kill someone, have them draw their entire library plus 1 card to have them deck out. You can then Snapcaster Mage, or you probably Time Spiral or Time Twister, if you have the Teferi deck combo out, just shuffle Stroke back into your library, recast it, killing another opponent, and then just see the Snapcaster maging, or another Time Spiral, and then kill them again, kill the third opponent. So that's how you win with Stroke of Genius. And then here are the wheels. This was actually a very expensive purchase here, probably the most expensive card in the deck, because not only is this a Time Twister, but this is actually an Alpha Time Twister. So there's probably the pride of the entire deck right here. I paid a lot of money. I actually was going to make a video about the purchase, but I paid a lot of money for this Alpha Time Twister. And here's the foil Windfall, which is, probably some people might even say it's better than Time Twister. And then Time Spiral, which is actually just a free Time Twister. This isn't a specific segment of the deck tech, but I just wanted to, since we did just show you Time Spiral, which wasn't foil, because a foil one just simply doesn't exist. I also thought I'd show you some other cards that either don't exist in foil or that I chose not to foil out. So Ponder, one thing if you didn't notice about this deck, I wanted to feature one of every promo or one of every foil. For example, we had the San Diego Comic-Con promo with Jace Vryn. We had the Expedition lands. We had the Masterpiece Amonkhet, which I don't know if you've seen. Yeah, you haven't seen those yet. We're gonna get to those. So we have like kind of one of every cool promo looking foil. So I do have a foil Ponder, but instead of running that, I wanted to run the Player Reward Ponder full art, only to show you that we have a little bit of every promo out there. So Back to Basics obviously doesn't exist as a foil. Mystic Remora, which we need to include, probably the cheapest card in the deck actually. But basically it has cumulative upkeep 1. Whenever someone casts an opponent casts a non-creature spell, you draw a card unless they pay 4. However, it is a May, so you have to actively remind them, are you going to pay 4? Are you going to pay 4? It is annoying, but you have to do that. I've won with Back to Basics and Stasis before. It can be very useful. Stasis just says everybody loses their untap step, and then you have to pay blue to keep it on play. Very useful, actually. It's a very good card that will just another Stax piece, which will enable the deck. And then there's Copy Artifact, which is another, doesn't exist in foil, but also just copies, one of our mana rocks. And then Back to Basics again. I've won with turn 1, Soul Ring, I think. Turn 2, Back to Basics, and then Tabernacle, which was devastating for every other player, because they would have their dorks out, they would have their their elves, their mana dorks, they would have whatever, they'd have Tymna, Thrasios, and they would just lose because they tapped out. They can't untap their non-basic lands, which most EDH decks are running non-basics now, and then they just have to destroy the creatures because they can't pay the mana. Here's some of the remaining 1 mana cantrips. You saw Ponder. Here's the foil Preordain, the DCI FNM promo Brainstorm, and then I actually cut Grafdigger's Cage for the Ancestral Vision. So if you were wondering where Grafdigger's Cage was, Ancestral Vision is a good opening hand card, but it's nothing else other than that. However, with Grafdigger's Cage, you can't really cast anything with Snapcaster Mage or Jace Vryn. So I thought, if I'm going to cut Curse for Jace Vryn, it also just makes sense to cut out Grafdigger's Cage for another spell. So if you've watched Siggy's list on TappedOut, I mean, this was kind of similar to that. I put it together, the entire deck word for word, but then I just decided to run the more expensive cards. So this is a signed foil Ancestral Vision by Mark Tedden. So we don't run a lot of removal, but here are the 2 removal spells we have. Both can be searched by Spellseeker, interestingly enough. Chain of Vapor basically says remove a non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and then that player may, or return it to their hand rather, and then they may sacrifice a land to copy it. So you'll see people going around, you'll remove a permanent, will bounce it to their hand. They'll destroy a land and bounce something else, maybe not your stuff, but maybe somebody else's. And then Chain of Vapor just ends up doing a lot of work for 1 mana. And then here's the promo High Tide I wanted to show you. Again, this wasn't a foil either. Probably should have mentioned that in the other segment. But basically, it helps to have essentially virtually 24 islands, like I said. Helps with Candelabra. It's a card that will help with Teferi activations as well with Chain Veil. You were probably wondering where our Counterspell package was. Well, here's most of it. I'm gonna show you one more card after this segment. But here we have the what do you call it? Masterpiece Invocations. Force of Will. I decided to make an invocation. Here's the Lunter signed Pact of Negation. Here is Counterspell, and here's Spell Pierce, all which are pretty good. I cut Negate and I cut Dispel only because, first of all, they were relatively cheap. I had the player reward Negate, but I thought, I'd just swap in for the player reward Ponder. Use Ponder as the player reward full art card to feature instead. Negate's actually really good. If I had to make this more into a competitive deck, I probably would run Negate. But here are some of the other removal spells. Mana Drain obviously is very useful. Delay is essentially a negate or a better negate, because if you're going to combo out soon, then it's just, having them get suspend is not very important. Now, Flush of Storm is also a very good card, stopping Adnod or Storm decks. And then obviously Mental Misstep is a no-brainer. With this last card in the deck, I thought I'd just remind you that you should always carry around supplies. It's always embarrassing when you have to, show the back of a Magic card as the token. I just printed this out, just using Photoshop. Just found a stock image, or actually the some image on Google. And then make sure you have, if you're running Art of Planeswalkers or counters, you need stuff. These dice are pretty cool. I bought them on like Amazon. And then that's actually the last card in the deck. So that's the entire deck right there. So a couple of other things I wanted to talk about is the legality of this deck. First of all, Time Twister is alpha, and a lot of people might be wondering if alpha cards are legal with non-alpha cards, considering if you look at the borders, they're a little bit more rounded than your typical Magic card is. The actual official ruling is that if you're not using sleeves, then your alpha cards can only be played if you're running other alpha cards, like an entire deck of alpha cards. All right. And the other, so I mean, I don't know if anybody would actually sleeve up an entire, or not de-sleeve an entire deck of 60 alpha cards and then just play them in a tournament, but this is official tournament rules. However, you can play alpha cards with non-alpha cards if you play them in sleeves. And as you can see, it's very, with triple sleeves, it's very hard to tell actually if the corners. The other ruling is, shuffling your deck. So ever since the card Battle of Wits came out, which is like, if you have like 200 cards in your deck, you win the game or something like that, people were wondering if you could legally have a Battle of Wits deck. And the ruling is, if you can shuffle the entire deck with your two bare hands, then you can legally play with your deck. And as you saw before, I was able to stack the entire deck in one pile. I think that's another thing that the deck has to legally be able to do. And as you can see here, I can just riffle. As long as you can kind of mash the deck, I'm just shuffling the deck by myself. And this is kind of proof that I can actually play this deck legally in a tournament. I don't actually know if I actually will play this in a tournament, but the fact that I can, in theory, shuffle this deck with just my two hands means that it should be fine. So there you have it. I'm just gonna put this put this baby down. There's the deck. And if you're wondering how I actually put this in a deck box, I use the Ultimate Guard 200 dual deck box, and this allows me to basically put half of the deck in one segment like so. You have to kind of put it in sideways. Usually I put decks forward and backwards, but here you have to kind of put it side to side because the triple sleeving oversleeves are a little bit too thick for the for putting it forward and backwards. And then I just put the other part here in the other remaining half of the deck box. And this kind of keeps it secure, keeps it snug. You can also try, I think you can also try it with the 160. The Ultimate Guard comes in two boxes. The 200 is for 2 EDH decks, and the 160 is for 2 80 card decks, or two regular decks, I guess. And then here's the Teferi. I can just put this. You can just kind of put this here. We can put this here. Maybe I'll put it with the other. Oh no, that's fine. Okay, cool. And then this is where the tokens go. You can put your tokens in here. You can put your dice in this compartment. This is not a product review of Ultimate Guard, but I am suggesting that if you do have a triple or double sleeved deck with perfect cards, I highly recommend this box here. It is very useful. You can just kind of put one compartment in here, and then you can put the other half here. And there's the deck, guys. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, thumbs up down below. Feel free to subscribe to my channel if you want to see more Magic content. I haven't been putting up a lot of videos, but this one I was really hoping to put out someday, because this is probably the most expensive deck I have owned in my entire life, and probably won't be taking it apart anytime soon. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys in the next one.